So, Obscured by Clouds, 1972, from the progressive English rock band Pink Floyd, 7th studio album, and it was regarded as a soundtrack for the French film La Vallée, which is the piece of work by Babette Schroeder, recorded in France, whilst Floyd were touring there. And I think it's a thoroughly pleasant piece of work, and of course was the prelude to the next album, the mega Dark Side of the Moon, which came out in 1973. So let's move on down a little bit for some of the background. So they'd already done a number of soundtracks for movies. Zabriskie Point came to mind. More, of course, in 1969, which is also a very interesting album, also directed by Babette Schroeder. And so the new film, La Vallée, I won't go into too much detail about that particular movie, other than to say it was about sort of travellers on a spiritual quest in New Guinea, of all places. After the recording was finished, the band then fell out with the film company, and so promptly released the album as Obscured by Clouds rather than the original title, which was going to be La Vallée, which of course is the name of the movie. So there we are, a little bit of controversy, and lots of short songs on here, in contrast to previous Floyd work, which was being very lengthy. Described as having some strong country music influences on several tracks, use of acoustic guitars, and also featured the VC S3 synthesizer played by Rick Wright, and also prominent use of electronic drums by Nick Mason. So certainly branching out were the boys, which act almost as a bit of a prelude for the magnificence that would become Dark Side of the Moon. And I'm going to go through the tracks now, and here we go. So the opening track fades in, it's the title track, and we immediately hear Wright on his synthesizer, which oozes its way to your eardrums. And then Gilmour adds the guitar, lush guitar sound to create a sort of dreamy, slow-paced rock, a staple of what Floyd had become and would continue to be presenting to their fan base. It's an instrumental. It's very, very clean, very polished, and very nice. When You're In follows, it's got a decent enough rock riff, but it's just recycled, and the organ chips in, but there's no development on it. I find that it sort of meanders off into the distance at the end, and the fade out is one of the lengthiest I've ever heard, and one wonders what they were doing in the recording studio to allow a 1.5 minute piece of music to develop into 2.5 minutes through the fade. So very disappointed. I read a review that suggested it was glam rocky, the riff, and connected Mark Bolan to this. I can't see any connection whatsoever, and it's all rather mundane. Second track is also an instrumental, but we get some lyrics contribution from Waters on track 3 called Burning Bridges. Wright's responsible for the music, and I'll touch on it now. Very characteristic of what Pink Floyd's music was like at the time, was becoming more like, was this sort of very slow, dreamy, psychedelic sort of phasing type rhythm with lazy sort of guitar solos and a sort of vocal delivery, particularly on this track by both Gilmour and Waters, that seemed compatible with you sitting in a English country garden in midsummer with a drink, possibly a beer, and smoking a joint and sort of gliding off into the stratosphere whilst listening to Gilmour's eloquent and tasteful guitar solos. That's what it sums up for me, and it still sounds wonderful. And just checking on the lyric, it appears that I got it all wrong, because there is no Roger Waters lead vocals on this. It's shared by Gilmour on verse 1 and verse 3. Wright is involved, and Wright sings on verse 2. And I'm going to read it. Bridges burning gladly, merging with the shadow, flickering between the lines, stolen moments floating softly on the air, borne on wings of fire and climbing higher. Ancient bonds are breaking, moving on and changing sides, dreaming of a new day, cast aside the other way, magic visions stirring, kindled by and burning, flames rise in her eyes. To verse 3. The door that stands ajar, the walls that once were high, beyond the gilded cage, beyond the reach of ties. The moment is at hand, she breaks the golden band. Doesn't really mean that much, other than the fact that it's possibly the end of a relationship, possibly a marriage, with some of the imagery, but I'm not too sure. I'll need to read it again. The gold hits in the, whatever the is a more up-tempo rocker. It's got a very American sound to it. It's sort of almost West Coast, the sort of rock beat, I feel. And for its time, it had an impact. It's not stood the test of time that well, it has to be said. But nevertheless, this was a soundtrack album, so what's the deal? A lovely acoustic-driven song, almost folk-like in its delivery, with some very pleasant vocals and a great little piano outro from Wright. This is one of the best songs on here, I think. I think lyrically the song's maybe got a nod to the notion of we're about to become rich, we're on the cornerstone, on the edge of something big, and it's about right, because we're moving on in age and we deserve some of the spotlight. That may well be a rather fleeting interpretation of this song, but once again, it's a very nicely presented song with Gilmour on lead vocals, and once again another collaboration really on the writing between Gilmour and Waters, and so that's What's the Deal. Closing track on side A, Mudmen. This was a particular favourite for my way back in 1972. I was at the tender age of 18 and very impressionable, but listening to it tonight, we're into 2022 and I'm approaching my 68th birthday, so this is 50 years back. It still holds a glow. It's got a very pedestrian piano drum beat, which again throws up images of hot summer days for some reason. And then a couple of minutes in, just under 2 minutes in, Open the Shoulders time, it's Gilmour and his sort of whizzy, spacey, psychedelic solo with God knows what pedals he's using. Absolutely stunningly hits you smack in the face. It really does still sound absolutely tremendous and instrumental again, and he just takes us up into the stratosphere. He's a wonderful guitar player, it has to be said, and at this time in their development and in my development, it was a perfect marriage. And just additionally to draw attention to Wright's an array really of sounds from him. The synthesizers back on display. He's got some Hammond organ in there. Doubtless they've been dubbed, and then the piano, of course. And this all sort of fits neatly surrounding Gilmour's extravagant guitar playing. Very much a highlight, Mudmen. Childhood's End, well, it starts off and you can almost hear the Dark Side of the Moon sort of perspective on it, as it's sort of without any form of beat or percussion. The keyboards sort of allow us to drift in, and then the percussion slowly ticks through, and it's almost identical to is it Us and Them on Dark Side of the Moon? It's certainly very familiar. And grabbing hold of Wikipedia, I've just had it confirmed that that intro was almost a carbon copy of the intro to Time, not Us and Them, from Dark Side of the Moon. And another fact, this was the last song written by Gilmour until after Waters left the band. So it gives you some idea of how after this Waters basically took control of the writing for the band. Yeah, there's also a reference to the title possibly being derived from the Arthur C. Clarke novel of the same name. And another point about Gilmour, lyrics. This is the last one where he's writing lyrics. There's another typical guitar solo by Gilmour to a chunky rhythm, which is impressive. So 3-4 became a single in America. Only the second one ever after seeing how many play. There's also a suggestion that it references Roger Waters' father's death in World War II. It's a very sing-along sort of type song, very jocular, and starts off with a 1, 2, 3, 4 Cockney accent intro, and it's chirpy. Sort of extravagant rock guitar solo towards the end, untypical really of Gilmour, but goes on too long, I think. It should really have been about 3 minutes, but it's gone into the 5th minute, and it tends to drag, but lyrics are interesting. Okay, so let's have a little recital for the lyric on 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. You shuffle in gloom of the sick room and talk to yourself as you die. Verse 2. Life is a short warm moment and death is a long cold rest. You get your chance to try in the twinkling of an eye. 80 years with luck or even less. So all aboard for the American tour, and maybe you'll make it to the top. And mind how you go, and I can tell you, 'cause I know, you may find it hard to get off. Verse 4. You are the angel of death, and I am the dead man's son. And he was buried like a mole in a foxhole, and everyone is still on the run. Verse 5. And who is the master of foxhounds? And who says the hunt has begun? And who calls the tune in the courtroom? And who beats the funeral drum? The memories of a man in his old age and the deeds of a man in his prime. You shuffle in gloom in the sick room and talk to yourself as you die. So, yeah, very much a note about Waters' father. And I'm just going to check, as I can do with this, that it's sang and written by Waters. So lyrically it's the strongest track on here. Stay is sung by Rick Wright. It's a love song as such, and it's got a very contemporary pop song feel about it. Obviously there are bits of twangy Gilmour guitar to remind us that we're listening to Pink Floyd, but it's very much a love song in nature, and quite appealing. The latter part of the song, we get the opportunity to listen to some extravagant wah-wah guitar from Gilmour, and it's a highlight. These vocals are shared by Wright and Waters, Wright responsible for writing the song. The finale is called Absolutely Curtains. It's a instrumental, and Wright once again introduces his new toy, the synthesizer, to the intro, and the back end of it we hear the chanting of the Mapuga tribe, who are part of the movie, if you get to see it, the La Valère movie. They're a sort of ancient ethnic tribe. I'm not quite sure where they're from though. They're probably from the Amazon area, but I'm not too sure. Anyway, this instrumental harks back a little bit to some of the sounds that we became accustomed to at the back end of the 60s, early 70s, with tracks on Sourceful Secrets and Avant-Gummer, a little bit sort of self-indulgent psychedelia. the authenticity of the chants, this Maguba chants, is obviously reflective of the fact that it is a soundtrack to this movie called La Valère, and the setting, of course, the New Guinea bush, and so these people live there, one assumes, nowhere near South America. But still, my geography wasn't that inspired, and an interesting credit is that one of the stars of the movie, Monique Girardi, the actress, is also a film editor and also vocalist and synthesizer player with David Allen's Gong, and was in a relationship with one Steve Hillage. So it all neatly knits together.